We got people starting to roll in here. I'll give it just a minute. Welcome to the 2025 webinar series for Hyperspace Challenge. We're so glad to have everybody here. So glad y'all taking time out of your day. So today we have a great topic. It's creative storytelling. So one of the most important things when you have a product is how do you tell that story and how do you get people interested in your product and how do you really drive audience, getting some people from, the audience to pay attention, to look at you, to be interested in what you're doing, like I said. So have a great group here to discuss some tips and tricks and some ways to kind of bootstrap. And, as a startup, how do you really, creatively tell your story? So if you have questions throughout the webinar, please put those in the chat. Make sure, actually, there's a Q&A button down there at the bottom, so be sure to put those in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, we'll actually ask you to put them in the Q&A. So please introduce yourself. I'm Kelly Stafford. I'm with the Hyperspace Challenge, and I'm the interim program manager. Tell us who you are, where you're from. And I am going to turn it over to Meredith. She's going to be our moderator today. So without further ado, Meredith, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks to everybody for joining us. And especially thank you to this absolutely delightful group of women that agreed to take time out to share their expertise and insight with us. I am the founder and CEO of the Riot Mind Agency, which is a communications and marketing agency that focuses on space and deep tech. We've been working with the Hyperspace Challenge for many years now, and are really excited to be able to bring together this group of people to talk about, storytelling and marketing for the industry. They're an extremely smart and entrepreneurial, creative, and authentic group of women. I think authenticity is really fundamental to some of the best storytelling. They have a very diverse background. Rafferty Jackson has a background in operations, Camille Bergen in engineering. Shireen actually has a past in both fashion design and astrophysics, and focuses on graphics and visual now. And then Diana, of course, is an incredible digital marketer with a really strong understanding of how to build a brand. So I'll let you guys make your introductions in terms of your backgrounds, and then we'll drive in. But the common thread here is that everyone is really driven by a passion for communicating the abstract of space science and the complexity of that to the public. And I think, in talking to you guys, I think it's important to note that you really believe that the public isn't just the consumer. It includes policymakers, investors, and customers, whether that's, B2B or B2C. So, keeping that humanity in mind as you're building your stories and figuring out your strategy, I think is really important and kind of a theme that I hear all of you talking about. Without further ado, I'll let you make your introductions. Rafferty, you want to kick it off?
Sure. I'm Rafferty Jackson from Jack Industries. I've been an operator coming up through Silicon Valley. So I was there in the 90s and went through the dot-com days and all of that revolution. So I was able to see companies that were breaking out into a new industry, providing new products to a marketplace that wasn't quite ready. When we think of products that are available now, like Chewy, right, getting your dog food, there was, dog delivery, pets.com was going to deliver to your house, but that company didn't make it because it was too early in the market. The market wasn't ready. So as we know, being in the space industry, we've kind of flushed through that already. When I think of the 2010s and the early 2020s, we had a lot of big ideas, but the capital wasn't ready. The marketplace wasn't quite ready. We are now ready. The market is here. The economy is here. We are starting to see companies IPO. We're starting to see big enterprises get built, and the serious space economy is now developing. So how I became involved in space, and the reason why I'm here, is that I want to make sure all the great ideas make it to the marketplace so the market can look at the idea and say whether it's a great idea or not. So I work very early in the 2-person, 3-person startup, STEM professionals spinning out of a university, coming out through the military, coming out through spinning out of SpaceX or wherever they're coming from. And I'm very focused on the fact that STEM professionals have been taught to communicate in a particular way that has made them radically successful. It's the exact opposite of the way they need to communicate with the rest of us. So I help these founders understand how to communicate to the rest of us. We'll talk about that later, and that's what I've been working on. And then I'm on the independent investment committee for Seraphim Space Venture Fund 2. So I've been involved in looking at startups. I also run the startup competition at the Satellite Show. This year in 2026, we're also relaunching the finance forum that I'll be curating. So I'm helping the early side of this economy stand up. And now that it is, it's really exciting that we have marketing professionals, because when I started working with Kelly at Hyperspace a few years ago, there weren't that many marketing professionals that could understand space besides saying, oh, you mean Star Wars, Star Trek. Now we have real professionals with deep expertise that know how they're going to help this economy grow.
Thank you for that. Camille, you've got your own expertise in storytelling and a really unique background. You want to share with us next, kind of some of that?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here. My name is Camille Bergen. I kind of wear a couple different hats, but I have a background in aerospace engineering. Quickly realized out of college that I didn't want to be an engineer, and that my skills were more aligned with being able to communicate that engineering. So being able to like deeply understand all the different physics and the math and the science and the engineering, and then communicate that to different audiences. And I learned that by first communicating to the public. In 2020, COVID, everyone was at home on their phones. And, as I think we all know, the social media boom kind of like really took off. And I started posting about space on Instagram just because I wanted to tell all my friends about it and wanted them to care as much as I did. And then that somehow, over the last couple of years, has turned into the largest independent audience dedicated to the space industry, technology, business, politics, etc. That is the Galactic Gal. I call her my alter ego. So now I have over 700,000 followers. Again, it's pretty surreal that there's that many people out there and growing every day who care about space. And so, there is an appetite. It's just a matter of like, how do we actually communicate to them? How do we actually reach them and get people to not only like know that there's all these satellites up there and there's all this space economy stuff that's happening, but like, why does it matter and why should they care about it? And, really from the context of like, so much of what we do is politically driven and so much of politics is public perception driven. And then that leads into, how do you get funding from these venture capitalists who also come from different backgrounds and don't have any understanding of space, traditionally speaking? How do you reach next generation talent that, you need world-class talent, but there's this talent war right now and there's a STEM gap. So how do you get your message out there to convince somebody that they should come work for you instead of somebody else?
Right.
So all these types of things. I did business development and marketing after I, transitioned out of engineering at Lockheed and a couple different startups, most recently at Vast. I started their marketing department and then left last year to kind of venture out on my own. And so I have since founded Modulate, and a marketing and strategy agency for aerospace and deep tech startups. And we come in as like a really integrated component of your team by running your marketing and communications at these early stages where, you may or may not know that you need marketing. Hopefully you do know, but you don't know where to start.
Right.
And also you don't really need a full in-house marketing team at the very, very, very beginning. That can be expensive and oftentimes hard to find. And so we're building a team that can come in and do your communications, your press, your social media, your video production, your photos, like the whole gambit of things, all the way down to your customer decks and your technical decks and your investor decks, all that kind of stuff. It's like a really integrated part of your team with the unique integration of a technology team. So we have a chief technology officer who's building a technology team. So that, we all come from science and engineering backgrounds, as I'll kick it off to Shireen here in a bit. And so we deeply understand your technology and have lived and breathed this market for so long and can, help translate your technology into, tangible communications and marketing strategies that help you win investors and customers and talent, et cetera.
Thank you for that. And Shireen, I know that you're really playing a key role in helping Modulate do all of that. Do you want to talk a little bit about how your background plays in and how unique it is too? I think that's one of the important things here is that how, everybody comes from a very different kind of background and brings those perspectives with them.
Yeah, of course. Hi. So I'm Shireen. I'm the creative director at Modulate Media. I do have a bachelor's of science, not bachelor's of arts, in graphic design. So very much rooted in the theory, the psychology, and the research part of science, designing for communications through science. So I got that back in 2013. I had a pivotal life-changing moment in 2015 when the Pluto flyby happened, and I really wanted to transition my efforts from fashion design through graphic design, marketing efforts into more of a science communication role, using my design skills to communicate science to the public. And ever since 2015, those have been the steps I've been taking, including going back to school to earn my second bachelor's in astrophysics, because I truly feel like if you can showcase through design and communicate the abstract concepts of astrophysics to the public, you can communicate anything through design to the public. So I've very much taken those steps to be able to communicate these complex topics to a wide audience, not just the public, but also the policymakers, the researchers that you're working alongside, the engineers that you're working alongside, because not everybody knows what the other person's doing, and what that other person could be doing could be benefiting you as well. So communication on every level, the words, the visuals, the photography, the videography, it's so integral to telling that story for any company or any initiative that you have. And I specialize, like one of my main core specialties within design is doing that through infographics. And these don't have to be complicated infographics. In fact, they should be simple. The faster, the clearer the message to your audience, your intended audience, the better you're relaying that information in a timely manner. So infographics is my specialty. I absolutely full-heartedly believe that you can take an infographic in the digital world as well as, in the print world, and use them as you need for multiple audiences. Because they are the root of communication visually.
Yeah. And I know we can go back, we'll come back to talking a little bit more about how important visual communications is in this particular industry. Diana, last but not least, you are a marketing superstar for one of the most brand forward space companies that I know of. And you've done an incredible job building them and their profile. Can we talk a little bit about your background and who you're working for now?
Sure. I'm Diana Klechkova, and I'm the CMO for Privateer. I'm incredibly fortunate in that the founders of our company, one of them is Steve Wozniak, who, of course, was the co-founder of Apple, and Alex Fielding, who's our CEO, was also very early on at Apple. So I think that tends to come forward in the value that our entire team places on brand overall as kind of the hub of everything that we communicate from there. So I'm a big believer in the strength of that brand personality and who you are as a brand, then being able to translate into every aspect of what you communicate. So it's something that we worked very hard to build up. You can see a bunch of our swag and stuff. We try to have fun, which are Hawaiian shirts, with our brand. Our headquarters are in Maui. That's also just like a gift to the marketing people, that makes it a lot of fun and provides some personality as well. But my background, I have some street cred in space, having worked for the last 8 years with Neil deGrasse Tyson's media company, Star Talk. So just as a space nerd in my spare time, I started out doing some volunteer work for them and have been involved in the company ever since. But my background before that was very much in brand and agency marketing world. I led global social media for Levi's. I worked at Omnicom, one of the large media agencies, and ran accounts for everything from like Nissan to Loctite glue to just you name it. I've sold it. And then I founded my own company called Zaya, which I still run today. So we operated very much in the way that Camille described, Modulate, as an extension of marketing teams, but we were at the time much more focused in performance media, so social media advertising. My background, my degree is unfortunately a BA, but in economics that has a lot of art and science mixed together. And that was one of my favorite things about doing that paid media work is really you're just using the social media platforms to run psychological testing on people constantly and really understanding who your audience is, what works for them, what gets them to react, take action. And so I try to bring a lot of that, bringing the art and science together into all of the work that I do now at Privateer.
Yeah. And when we spoke, I guess it was last week in advance of this conversation, one of the things you said to me was it's important to remember that regardless of whether your audience is B2B or B2C, we're all human. And I think that's really important. And I think that's probably one of the strongest through lines that I hear from all of you. And with that kind of setting the tone, Rafferty, I want to start with you and talk a little bit about why it's hard to develop a clear and resonant narrative and how startups in particular should be thinking about that process and should approach that process.
So when you think about STEM professionals, right? So science, technology, engineering, and math, they communicate very specifically to the problem they're solving, right? And that's how they win. That's how you solve the problem in the test. That's how you defend your thesis. That's how you get your grants, right? It's a very specific style of communication. And if you've ever gone to a presentation where they have their poster and they're talking specifically about what they've done, it is technical and tactical. It is straight into this patent did that, our patent does this. That invention did this, our invention does that. And it's really down into the nitty gritty. And the people who quote unquote win, right? The professors who get tenure, the professors who get grants, the people who get funding into their labs are the people who can really communicate that well. So they have been rewarded for years in a very specific way of communicating. On the other side of the world, if you think about people that have studied in the arts and in literature, people who haven't gone to any college, maybe came out of university or didn't even finish university, didn't even finish high school, we tend to communicate in sort of a big arc. So if you ask a stranger for directions, you say, hey, I'm sorry, I don't know this area. I need to get to, and you tell them the big picture. What's your end point, right? Like, I need to get to this statue I'd like to see. That's because we all sort of live in these big arc stories. That's how we've learned history, right? You don't start history with World War II started on this day, right? History starts with this long arc, right? Like, what happened in World War I that led to what happened between World War I and all of the pieces. But STEM folks get very feature driven, very, driven into these lines, while the rest of us, the majority of the people in the world, are in these big arcs. Mm-hmm. So what I help teach the founders that are in that world specifically is how to come out and talk to the rest of us. And it's the same communication that we have learned since our brain developed, communication, and it's storytelling. But the thing that I work on with the founders the most is, what is the moral of your story? Mm-hmm. What is your why? Not what do you make, but why this problem? Why is it this customer problem that you have decided to make an invention to solve? So why do we all care? So if you see, like with Diana, she'll be able to tell you very clearly the why of Privateer, because that's the brand, and then it walks down into the features. Mm-hmm. So with those STEM founders, once they understand the way you communicate is how you're going to compete. That's how you're going to really get into winning as a company with your engineers, with your engineering core. But when you're out talking to the rest of the people, trying to hire talent, trying to convince a landlord to give you a lease when you have no credit and no history, trying to get into a customer discovery conversation, you have to have that big why moral part of your story so the rest of us can even follow you and we can get interested. So, for example, if Diana walked right up to me and said, "We're doing debris removal," I'd be like, okay, I might not know space has debris. I might not care that space has debris. I don't know how that affects me. But if she walked up to me and said, just like we're trying to make the planet a better place for everybody to live, we are taking the best of our technology to make space equally as safe and equally as beautiful as we've made it down here. That's what we do. Then I can be like, oh, okay, that's important to me. I understand it. Then she could get into we could start talking about the product offerings. But the reality is the product doesn't matter if I don't understand where we are in the world. So that's basically what I work on in trying to help STEM professionals understand your features. If it's a feature or it has a price, that's a story for further down the road when you've already got people following you and understanding what the big promise of your vision is, what the big idea is. But you have to welcome me into the conversation so I can understand what you're talking about. And then we can get into the, details if I want to try to understand those details. And then the second part that I always teach them is I'm in the world of the 5-minute pitch, the 30-second, the 1 minute, make sure the big ideas are getting out. And in that, you're never going to make a sale and you're never going to get invested. But what you are going to do is transfer your story to the audience so the audience becomes your storytellers. That's how you get your idea out into the world. It doesn't matter that I don't really understand what Diana's company does. What matters is that I could turn to you, Meredith, if we met for coffee and say, hey, I met this really interesting lady. She works for this company that's working on making sure that we understand debris in space. Oh my God, did you know there's garbage in space? We garbaged up space. And then you don't need to understand space and say, wow, that sounds really interesting. I know somebody who told me they're investing in things like this. Maybe I should let them know about Diana's company. And that's how it all gets out. I don't know a feature. I don't know a patent.
Right.
I don't even know what she makes, but I know the big idea and I can story tell that.
Right. Simple, strong, and to the point. Really streamlined. Yeah. Camille, I know that you've got some thoughts as well on storytelling and really unique approaches. Can you talk a little bit about how, I would love to hear your response to Rafferty's comment, but also I want to talk a little bit about how startups can differentiate their story without sounding like everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo so much of what Rafferty said. In fact, all of it. And I think that, at a high level, you have to understand, you have to go into all of these storytelling conversations, understanding that cool tech is not enough. And like Rafferty said, right? It's also, if you're too early in the market, that's not enough, right? And so taking a step back, kind of checking your ego at the door, we all have it, right? Checking your ego at the door. You're building really cool tech, but now we need to understand that is not enough to get investment because these investors probably have no background in space. And even if they do have a background in space and have invested in space companies before, theoretically, you're building something that has never been done before. You're solving a problem that has probably never even been thought of before, right? Or maybe it's been thought of, but in the context of oh, I have a really constrained power budget and I have to, essentially turn off my AC to take this Zoom call right now. And that's how it is on a satellite today. And I just kind of accept that that's what it is, right? You have this problem, but you're not thinking about a solution because that's not your job, right? And so now, but you as a startup founder that is your job. You've thought of this idea, you've thought of this problem, you're building this really cool technology. Oh, there's all these other cool innovative technologies that now make your solution a reality. Okay, now we need to translate that, like Rafferty said, into a story that sells, into a story that actually resonates with people and moves them to act. And so at Modulate, the reason we named ourselves Modulate in a bunch of different reasons, modulation in frequencies and signals, but also modulations in communications, right? And so bridging that gap between the engineering and technology and a communications mindset. And so in modulating a frequency modulating a signal, you can modulate the frequency, the amplitude, and the phase. Mm-hmm. The frequency is how do you connect with people on their wavelength, right? Like, how do you actually communicate to somebody that can receive your message, right? So it's not enough to go to somebody and say, I have this hyperspectral imager. What does that mean, right? Like, as an engineer, I didn't learn what hyperspectral meant in college, right? And unless I'm actively building a hyperspectral imager, I have no idea what that means. The first time I heard it, I was like, literally, what is that, right? Going into, if you can see the Earth in all of these different wavelengths, suddenly you can track methane emissions, or you can see this part of the Earth in more detail, and then you get this data, and then that translates into not only impact but also revenue, because people are money driven, right? And then modulating the amplitude, right? That's how you cut through the noise, right? If everyone is down here and everyone is just sending out these like little noisy signals, I raised this little amount, and I got this tiny little contract, and this, and also, by the way, everyone is saying that they're revolutionary, they're transformational, they're all of these buzzwords that none of us have like seemingly come up with like anything better to say, right? How do you level set, like how do you bring your level up so that your amplitude is here? Mm-hmm. So now everyone is here and you're here, and that signal is what people are going to hear. And then the last thing is modulating the phase. So you have to not only reach people by saying the right things at the right frequency level and like the right channels, the right, how, like a radio signal, right? Like, are you tuned into the right FM, AM radio station to receive the frequency that they're broadcasting on? But also, are you reaching them at the right time? Because people are not always going to be able to receive that information. Like if I'm on this Zoom call right now and my co-founder comes in here and he's like, I'm like, no. I am on a webinar right now. Like I cannot receive that information. It's the same kind of thing, right? And so in signals, right, you can modulate the phase so that you are reaching people at the right time. And understanding all of that, kind of going into like, okay, how do you actually do that? For me at Modulate, it starts with a messaging framework. So we start kind of very similar to what Rafferty does, right? And I think very similar to what all of us do in some way, shape, or form, is you start by saying, what is your why? What is your story? So often in this industry, we talk about the what. We talk about a hyperspectral imager. We don't talk about, you can track a methane leak in this amount of detail, et cetera, et cetera. And then you go from there and you say, okay, I have this overarching story. Now, how do I break that story down into very bite-sized chunks that an investor will hear, a government stakeholder will hear, a policymaker will hear, world-class talent who happens to be Gen Z, or even how are you going to communicate to a Gen Z versus a millennial versus somebody a little bit older? Like, how do you communicate to all those different audiences? Because all of them are motivated by different things. All of them care about different things. All of them are on different channels, right? Like, are you on Instagram? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you on TikTok? Like, are you on Substack or Reddit? Like all of these different places. Also, are you in person? Are you at the right conferences? Like, it's not just a digital world, right? Are you speaking at the right conferences, or are you bringing, your for example, space station to a very highly technical small satellite conference, right? Like that's probably a little bit of a mismatch, unless there's, specific things that you're trying to get done there. And so all of that, like you're building a messaging framework that is using language that communicates to all of these different audiences, finding out the channels that they're on, digital or in person, and also when do you talk to them, and at what stage of the company do you talk to them, all of that kind of stuff is, I think, a very practical way to start approaching that problem.
Absolutely. And then, once you've got that kind of big picture narrative or why, and you've got a messaging framework within which to work, at that point, you're starting to bring the story to life. Shireen, do you want to talk a little bit about how you guys do that, how you think about translating the kind of why, but also the how into something that makes this a multidimensional and really rich story?
Yeah, of course. So I'm gonna frame it through what I had originally stated as my specialty, infographics. So basically, I put a visual to everything that Rafferty and Camille have said. We're taking a concept and visually communicating it in simple terms, which also helps to play with like level setting that story arc that you're dealing with, creating iconography for those points in time that need to matter for that specific story or that specific technology, and making it relatable to multiple audiences. This is, I mean, yes, there's visual communication can also include branding, and absolutely that is your identity of the company. You've created that story visually, and now in where I like to come in is like, let's tell the deep tech story now so that multiple people can access and understand why this is important to them on several levels. Doing that through graphic design, through a brochure, even like your infographics can be brochures, your data. If you're collecting data, use the data that you've already paid for to tell the story. For example, like Earth observation data, high spectral imagery. You're showcasing why it's important for us to pay attention to the the coral reef population around the Hawaiian Islands. If your company is gathering that data, visually tell that story. Don't just tell me with words. Hawaii is in trouble. The coral population is in trouble. Cool. What does that mean? And how is that so much, that can be so much more impactful with the imagery that goes along that with that story. And that's really like what I like to bring to the table. Because yes, your brand identity is absolutely the first thing that you see, but visually communicating your story is what's going to also resonate with those multiple audiences.
You know, Rafferty, you said something earlier about how memorable visual is. Can you talk about that for just a second? And then I want to get into more of a controversial topic around the application of AI to some of these efforts that marketing undertakes.
Yeah, so our brains are always looking for visual cues. So part of the way that we developed communication in our brains, once we were able to get past grunting, so this is part of human development in the reptile brain, is that we were always able to visually see. So visual is still in the reptile brain the thing that hits the hardest, the fastest, along with smell, right? So there's some things that really hit hard. Your brain will always go to the visual before it will start to decode the words. That's just because we're looking for predators. It's just the way it works. And you can try to talk yourself into something else, but it doesn't work that way. And if you ask filmmakers, they'll tell you exactly why it worked. You know, they know how that works. So if your title page has, you know, the name of your company and that, you know, we'll go to this hyperspectral sensor, and you make a hyperspectral sensor, and yet you're showing a rocket going to a fictional planet, I'm not going to see the name of the company or the hyperspectral. I'm going to see the rocket going to the fictional planet. And I am already thinking that you're a launch company, maybe going to deep space, or you're a science fiction storyteller, or worse yet, you don't know what you're doing, or worse yet, you don't even care about me and your audience enough to give me a decent graphic. You're just putting AI slop together. You've gone over to Midjourney, you've made some slop, and you've said, like, whiz bang, this looks great. If you make a thing, that should be on your front page. Full stop. If you are a more developed, sophisticated company with a professional marketer like Privateer, you're allowed to do other things because the deep professionalism of that marketer knows a lot more about how to move that brand forward. But if you're just a founder, you're a group of like 5-10 people trying to get your idea out, you've got to be really careful about the visuals that you're serving up because they're doing things to the brain of your audience. And so a really great example is there was a company that I was helping, and they were doing software, pure software, no hardware. Their software could take an image from a drone, right? So the image would come down from the drone and they'd map it into what was really happening and do error correction, right? So if the images look like this, their processing of the images would lay over what was really happening and give you a correct, actual real-time image. Really hard software, really hard to do. Front page of the deck had a drone. And so, of course, I thought they made the drone. And then as I'm going through the deck, I'm trying to figure out, well, where are you making the drone? Where's the drone? Do you have to have the drone? So the very first question as an investor was, well, is this a camera that goes on a drone or is it a drone that you're making? They're like, no, we make software. I'm like, well,
So you've automatically confused your audience.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So be really careful with that imagery. And I would say no imagery is better than slop or the wrong story.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Shireen, I'm sure you have a lot of opinions on AI and as does everyone. I think that to Rafferty's point, it is important to underscore that no image is better than a bad image or a confusing, and a bad image could be a confusing image. It could also be a misdirected image. I was sharing a potential brand with my sister the other day, who's a creative director. And the brand was presented in a very science fiction way when it was actually about real people. And that was her first thought was, where are the people? Like, this is taking me out of, what I'm seeing here is otherworldly and it's taking me out of real world application, So I think that's a really important point, but just as important is the bad imagery is also detrimental to your brand, even if it's representative of what you do. So Shireen, can you talk a little bit about, how we should be thinking about using AI in particular as it applies to visuals? And then Diana, I want to turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about dig into brand and some of your thoughts on the things we've talked about so far.
Yeah, I think we're at a place, and I think this was echoed too earlier, that the public and your audience is at a point where AI has been around for a while now, and we are all very aware of what AI looks like. And in terms of that alone, and in terms of like what message you're trying to put out there to your audience and your customers, is like, do you want it to be, are you taking shortcuts in your marketing strategy? And I think that's kind of where I come in, where my opinion is with AI now. If you're using AI imagery, you're kind of saying, I'm doing this on my own and I'm trying to use a shortcut. But also you're leaving it in the hands of, what AI is capable of. And I think when you hire an expert, you're hiring an expert who can do the research in the right way. And that is very important with what we're doing. Like, we're communicating science, we're communicating tech, we're communicating a story at a human level. And you need a human to do that, and you need a human to put guardrails on that. And those are things that are lacking in AI at this point. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm also, when it comes to AI, I'm not using it to craft any imagery. It goes back to something I learned in design school, is like, when you're trying to create a new graphic or a new project, it's almost counterintuitive to look at what's already out there, because then your mind is stuck on, recreating what you saw as your own versus creating something completely original. So I don't like to start with AI unless it's like brainstorming words or, creating maybe a process for how I can think of crafting this. But only with words. I'm not pulling imagery. I'm not pulling inspiration. Not to say that I'm not looking at inspiration. I mean, definitely when you're creating for an industry, you want to know what your competition is doing and what that looks like, what the colors are, what the brands are already out there, are what are the shapes of the icons and the logos, just so you know where you can fit within that, but I'm not going to use AI to be like, give me a logo or give me options for a logo for a mission or for a logo for a mission that hasn't, you know, been done before. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that we all were discussing earlier is that there's certainly a role for AI in workshopping, I think, especially. And you talked a little bit about using it to help you figure out process. And that's, but I know, at least personally, when I use AI, which is on a daily basis, there's nothing fast about it. It certainly does speed up processing. It speeds up, production, I think, but it's also, if you're using it right, it's like you've got someone to brainstorm with, essentially, and you're doing a lot of back and forth and a lot of iteration and creation. Diana, I want to turn it over to you. And first of all, I assume you have some thoughts about the application of AI.
I do.
And all of the
Who
things
doesn't
that we've
at
been
this
talking
point?
about.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of open it up to you to share some of your thoughts at this point instead of just posing a very prescriptive question.
Yeah. So I have specifically on the AI conversation, I have a couple of things to throw in there too from a slightly different perspective. So I am not wholly opposed to utilizing AI in the right time and place. So especially when you do have a strong brand established, and you are looking for things that are meant to be fun and playful and very quick, like not something that is going to be a part of your brand going forward, not something that lives on your website. I've used really just kind of playful AI imagery for a LinkedIn post saying, hey, we're going to be in San Francisco for this event. And it's just like an AI generated thing of our little astronaut surfing over the Golden Gate Bridge, whatever. Everybody knows it's AI. I'm not trying to pretend it isn't.
Right.
We're having a little bit of fun for a one-off post, and it is generally aligned to our existing strong brand.
Mm-hmm.
So I think especially from a practical standpoint, like pick and choose your times, use it playfully in like full acknowledgement of it being an AI generated image, but hey, you needed something for attention on this post and it aligns well to this thing that you're doing. That's great, right? If you don't have a designer on staff to design something for you every single time. Also great for that is templates in Canva. Please pay for Canva Pro and get a designer to make you templates. I'm sure we'll dig into that too. But from a practical standpoint, sometimes you use it, but just being thoughtful about it. I also, being somebody who is relatively creative, but not at all artistic, AI, like ChatGPT, is really helpful for me in iterating through and trying to bring to life what I have in my head. So I imagine for someone like Shireen, she gets to do that by just making it out of thin air. I unfortunately do not have that talent. And so though AI might get it not quite right, it's easier for me to try to shape what it spits back to me, to then have something to give to a professional designer and be like, I am trying to communicate this in this direction. Here's as close as I could get it. Here's what's still wrong with it. Please put take it that last mile, take it that last 20%. And I think, again, from a very practical standpoint, when you're dealing with constrained resources, being able to take things as far as you can before handing it off to that professional, so that you're eliminating some of that back and forth that needs to happen for them to like suss out what's in your head. I think that's another really helpful space for AI beyond just kind of workshopping, but really trying to like pull out whatever that vision is that's in your head so you can give it to the professional.
Yeah, I think that I just want to add, I think that's brilliant because I know, like, for example, I use Claude. And if you ask Claude, can you please give me the format of a marketing brief? Then as the founder or the person trying to figure this out, at least now you know what are all the questions that the marketing people are looking at. It's your chance to see, like, all these different things that you would never have known. So you can start working on trying to fill it in. So when you do try to go to Canva, at least you have a better idea when Canva's saying, well, what color do you want? And you're like, I don't know. Well, now you've thought about it because you've got some prompting from AI on what are the fundamentals of this, incredibly marketing is incredibly complex, just as complex as any other pillar of an enterprise. And I think that's a great way to use it. I'd call it, Diana, that you're doing it ish, right? Like you're going ish as far as you can go as a not, you're not a creative designer, but you know what you're trying, you can see it in your brain and you're trying to match it as close as you can when you hand it to the designer, so that gap is much smaller, and your money, especially if you're constrained, hopefully it's only one iteration to get what you want versus, something came back from the designer and you're like, what is this? This is not at all what I wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Air Force Research Lab recently used a phrase that I really liked, human machine teaming. And I think that that's a really important way to think about AI. And I agree with you, Rafferty, that using AI to, something like ChatGPT, for instance, to ask, what would be an outline of a marketing plan that needs to do X, like that gives you a really nice framework to then fill in the answers. But that additional expertise and insight, and I would say not just from one single person, but also multiple people, can be really valuable. That gives you a much richer approach to how you're thinking about your marketing. So I want to get to some of the really practical things here. Can we talk a little bit? You mentioned Canva. You guys mentioned Claude. Obviously, we're all familiar with ChatGPT. Can we talk a little bit about other tools that you love that make a DIY effort among an early stage company easier to execute at a more professional level? I'll just open it up. Who has a favorite they want to?
Well, I also, kind of jumping off of the last points, also want to say that ChatGPT, any of these LLMs, they're not great, right? But they're starting points even for messaging frameworks, even just helping you know what to ask. How do I even start to think about what does an investor care about versus what does the government care about versus what does Gen Z care about? And if you're not Gen Z, how do I even learn what Gen Z cares about? That kind of stuff. I feel like using it smartly, you please still use your brain. And I think that that's where we can start to see the divide on social media or anything right now, where you can see okay, you clearly just put this into ChatGPT and then spit it out, and you didn't even change the formatting, so it's obvious that it's ChatGPT, and that's it, and you post it or you use it in your slide deck or whatever it may be, right? But using these tools to ask the smart questions, and this whole idea of prompt engineering now is very real. Understanding how do you ask ChatGPT or any of these other tools the right questions so that it prompts you to ask the right questions to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting now as we kind of shift the way that we approach communications, that I find myself thinking about how to create a prompt. And it can take a couple hours actually to do it really well sometimes, depending on how complex it is and how many sources you need it to draw from, and how multidimensional.
One of my favorite questions to ask ChatGPT is, what am I missing? So I'll put together an idea for something, here's what I'm thinking. What am I missing?
What am I not? Yes.
And it makes it just a bunch of stuff that's I'm not actually missing. That's fine. But sometimes it'll catch something oh yeah, I did not include this, and I really should have thought that through in whatever plan I'm developing. And it's very good at throwing those suggestions your way and just kind of filling in any gaps.
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned that. Yeah.
The only caution I would have to everybody is that, like myself, I'm not a marketing expert. The sycophancy of these systems will tell you that you're a genius marketing person. So be careful, because you're not. So when you say can you give me a marketing brief? And it's you're a genius at marketing, that you knew to get a brief. And then it gives you this brief, you're not a genius at marketing, and your idea is not great. And it's not all that sycophancy that's telling you you're great at something that you have no real expertise in or experience in. You really have to just sort of table it. It's easy when you're engaging with these tools in your own expertise, because when it gives you that baloney, you
recognize it.
Yeah, you recognize it, but it gives you the same baloney when you're way outside your expertise. So don't get confused and think that whatever it is you've done is perfect or great, and you don't need to talk to anybody else about it. It's not true. You just have to you have to throw that over your shoulder as well.
And I think that underscores the importance of, there is a time and place for DIY, and all of us professionals even use these tools, right? But there comes a point where you do need an expert in the room to cut through that noise, if you will, right?
Yeah, certainly. So let's talk about in these last few minutes some actionable, practicable, accessible, economical tactics in particular that early stage startups could apply when they're kind of DIYing their own marketing and PR and or working on a shoestring budget. Usually those go hand in hand. Can we have what are your favorite kind of tactics that people should be thinking about using to differentiate and kind of rise above the noise?
So just basically, I'll tell you one thing is people can't understand more than three things at a time. So when we get these flyers at conferences that are, like so full of stuff, very, very hard to understand. So you have to really think hard about like, what are the three things you're really trying to communicate and what's really important. And if you can't decide what the three things are that are important, then you need to back up and ask yourself, who are you talking to and how are you helping them? Because throwing up a bunch of information on me, either visually, in a flyer, in a video, in whatever, you're asking me to do work. And that's not my job. I'm your audience. Your job is to give me something delightful that I can grab and think about and get engaged with. So I would say, like, be really polite to your audience and be mindful that it's not about what you want to tell them. It's about what they need to know about you, and to be really kind of mindful of that. The back and forth is very different than a STEM back and forth, right? This is now you're trying to put it out to the rest of the world, and we don't communicate like STEM professionals. We want to have a nice story that we can grab and hold and really get delighted with.
I think this is where templates come in. I mentioned templates, right? Investing in the right places for professionals to help you, not with something that's a one-off, but things that you can use over and over again in different ways, and then stick to those templates. Having those live in Google Slides. These are my templates for slides when I'm presenting, whether to a customer or an investor. Templates in Canva. I know I do not stray from the brand kit that is in Canva for me, and the formats for social posts and whatever the things I'm going to be using most commonly. So you do need to invest. And I think, Meredith, you talked about constrained budget, shoestring, we don't have enough. I would love to dig into your finances and see what you are spending on that you could maybe not spend on. Like, do you need to go to every conference? No, it's really expensive. Let's maybe take 10 grand away from traveling to Australia to see the people that you could see in the US. And